they want to test it themselves, go ahead. So we expanded our licensing to allow them to essentially check in and check out tools to use against their code. And, embedding that into how they work was a big component of it.
Hi, you're listening to The Secure Developer. It's part of the MyDevSecOps community, a platform for developers, operators, and security people to share their views and practices on DevSecOps, Dev and Sec collaboration, cloud security, and more. Check out mydevsecops.io to join the community and find other great resources. This podcast is sponsored by Snyk. Snyk is a dev-first security company helping companies fix vulnerabilities in open source components and containers without slowing down development. To learn more, visit snyk.io. On today's episode, Guy Podjarny, president and co-founder of Snyk, talks to Roland Cloutier. As the Chief Security Officer of ADP, Roland works to protect and secure one of the world's largest providers of business outsourcing solutions. Prior to that, Roland served as the Vice President and Chief Security Officer of EMC, where he spearheaded protection of the company's worldwide business across both the commercial and government sectors. He has held executive security management roles at consulting and management security service organizations and has more than 9 years of experience in federal law enforcement.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning back in. We today have a person whose security responsibility is quite broad, in an organization very much a top tier enterprise. We have Roland Cloutier from ADP, who's the Chief Security Officer at ADP. Welcome to the show, Roland. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Roland, we have a whole bunch of things to talk about today. I think we'll tap hopefully into both your general forward thinking, but also kind of your experience in large enterprise and, not just the theories of, modern security and developers and all that, but dealing with it in the trenches and actually execute it in a large organization. But before we dig into those, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What is it that you do today, but also how did you get into security? What has been your journey?
Yeah, so, interesting enough, I actually came from the law enforcement and military side, started out in the Air Force, believe it or not, as a combat security policeman. My focus was on aerospace defense. And, once I had left the Air Force and Department of Defense, 9 countries and, 6 years, it was time for me to head home, and I got into federal law enforcement. And soon what I found is that every crime has something to do with a computer. Everything we're investing in. It was crazy, right? So I kept going to some friends of mine who were in computer science, and they said, maybe you should just go back to school for this and stop bugging us in a polite way. And I did that. I went back to BU for a couple of years, came out and just got bit by the bug, man. I loved the whole idea of defending and understanding the deep aspects of the technology, and eventually owned a couple of my own companies after I had worked for companies like EDS and got sucked into the dark commercial world and ended up becoming the first CISO at EMC.
With those first companies, were you doing a security role or were you kind of running the business?
It was more consulting. So it was security. So when I stepped into EDS, it was actually building security teams for critical infrastructure defense, which was fun. I mean, you're every day something's breaking, you're building it, in the late 90s, early 2000s, when there were not a lot of security practitioners. You didn't have formal critical incident response centers. It was, a handful of men and women that were saying, hey, you're the security team, help us figure out how to protect this network. And before all the great technology that we have today was even out. So yeah, I was doing kind of all the ground pounding stuff. Got it.
Okay, sorry, and I cut you off. So you did that consulting, and then you got into being the CISO.
Yeah, at EMC, and that was great. Started there with, we like to say 9 guys in a firewall or 2, and ended up building a global converged security organization with over 200 folks. Some of the best practitioners I had ever worked with. Spent several years there, and then got sucked down towards the city and I've been working with ADP. Next Tuesday makes a decade I've been with ADP now, so 10 years. It's been absolutely amazing. It's a different job every day. And quite frankly, I feel like I've only been here a couple of years. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, they must be doing something right to kind of have you stick around for a decade, instead of doing those, it's a scary word. So let's start unraveling a little bit the security organization. So what does your security org look like? What are the primary teams? And we'll get into dev, right after.
Yeah, so Guy, like we had spoke before, I have a converged security organization. So that means that there's one throat to choke or back to pat, I guess, however you want to look at it, from a corporate perspective. All security functions and operational risk functions roll up into something called the Global Security Organization. That's what I'm fortunate enough to lead. So we have traditional cyber defensive operations. So think about cyber engineering operations, app dev, security testing and analysis, global vulnerability assurance. Those core teams sit within our technical security services stack. And then we kind of followed the critical infrastructure and banking model. We have a threat and incident management group. So this is our 4 critical incident response centers around the globe. We are, a human capital management, and as part of that, we have a lot of information money. So data moves all over the place. So we have a specifically built team for business security incidents. These are non-cyber incidents, if you will, but things that are more data or privacy that we want to be able to respond quickly to. And then, of course, our core threat intel and red teams, that stack. And then we have we call it converged security. A lot of people call it corporate security. So criminal and civil investigations, Office of Public Safety for our campuses, associate protection teams to make sure our associates are safe wherever they are all around the globe. So you can kind of consider that our police department, if you will. We have about 60,000 associates operating in about 80 different countries. So it's a mid-sized city, and of course, with that comes a lot of responsibility to ensure our people are protected and our sites are as well. They also manage our global business resilience and crisis response team. So at ADP, our business resiliency is composed of business continuity, disaster recovery, and crisis management. Disaster recovery from an operational standpoint actually sits within our global products and technology, or our IT organization, and our facilities organizations, if you will. But business impact analysis, business continuity planning, and when really things go bad, the crisis management itself falls within an organization that I support globally. So we have one centralized organization to do that. Then we have our own financial crimes stack. So obviously ADP pays 1 in 6 people on your street, moves a few $1 trillion a year. So we have a team of dedicated practitioners that just focus on anti-fraud, fraud defense, fraud investigations, and putting bad people in jail around the globe. And then we have our Office of Trust. So this is a team that deals with our clients, about 750,000 clients around the globe. They all want to know how we protect their information, what our security programs like. And then we have a lot of partners and our own internal associates that we want to train, educate, and ensure that they understand their responsibilities. So they do end user awareness training, client engagements, and finally they work actually with our field, our sales, and our client-facing folks to create content and have those discussions with the client as well. We spend a lot of time there. And then, the really final piece to that puzzle is all of the folks that we have that sit in the business. So we have our business security office that has business security analysts, technical security managers, and they serve 3 functions. One is to make sure that all the businesses we have are getting the centralized security services that they need. The second is to make sure the centralized security services know what the business really needs to build it into our systems, into our processes, into our services. And the last component is really to ride shotgun. I mean, these men and women do an amazing job of educating the business on the why, the what, and helping them prioritize on reducing risk within their business. A lot of times we don't even call it security, kind of air quotes here at ADP. It's business operations protection. It's really about how do we protect that business. And then our 2 supporting functions underneath that is our converged security architecture. Instead of each stack having their own architects, we have one set of architects that work for all of those programs, both product and defensive operations, so we can leverage resources, technology platforms instead of building them independently for everything. And then if you were to think about the size of my operation, I'm about big enough to go public. I mean, if I was a managed security services firm, we're probably that large. So I have a business operations function that does portfolio management, finance, and all of those things underneath it. So in 3 minutes or less, I guess that's the entirety of our program.
Well, that's quite an empire there, right? You've got, there's a lot of different sort of moving pieces. We'll naturally kind of dig a bit more into sort of that app dev and how you engage, but let's sort of keep it still a little bit higher level. And I have a couple of questions that came up. One is, you mentioned these sort of, the business security officers. Do they interact all the way down to indeed that app dev? I mean, trying to sort of understand the matrix here when it comes to sort of product development and the likes versus the sort of the per business security perspective. Are those two very independent things? Do business security people have some responsibility for the app dev within their businesses? How does that work?
Yeah, so they have some responsibility and the product, but not at the app dev. Our architects, so we have a global group of architects, and what we do is we take a senior security architect and we put them in the product. So instead of delivering independent services and pontificating from on high, and thou shalt and I'll review your stuff, we put them in with the DevOps groups. Their focus is sit there at the time of design, thought leadership, in development to actually be the expert on the teams. So that is where core defensive development gets introduced into the products. We call it by design. So we have security by design and privacy by design. The BSO, so you bring up a good point. The business security officers have an important function, and they take the information we have out of our global vulnerability management, our security testing and analysis teams, and they ensure that, and I'll use a loose term, we score our products. And you have to maintain a certain level of scoring, if you will, to be able to go GA with your product. And so they help the business understand that and make the appropriate changes to the products when things come up. So we don't want to slow down the DevSecOps teams or the DevOps groups with vulnerability issues that can be just put back into rally and run at full speed in triaging going forward. But we want the business to understand their problems and their products, and we let the business security teams handle those.
Got it. So for the first part, the security architects, they're basically embedded within the DevOps teams. They report up into the sort of a central architecture team. And are they kind of perpetually embedded, or is it per project? Like, is it a person that would come in and out of those teams, or is there a person that they know?
No, we want the historical knowledge of the previous product, so we want them embedded. We want them to understand the go-to-market, what that product's going to do, and how it's going to develop over the next 3 years. Yeah, they're really part of the team.
Got it. Okay, that makes perfect sense. So one more question, high level, is how have you seen that? Like, you've been there, you've run this group for 10 years. I'd imagine that ADP, like most enterprises, has sort of, invested more in digital and in modernizing and maybe embracing the cloud. What would you say are like the major changes that have occurred into this format between, 10 years ago and today into how do you build the org?
I'll be real straight here. This is really only 2 years old, maybe 3 years old. We started to talk about by design because, what happens in every enterprise, you have really smart technologists that are looking at next gen technology and running fast. And then you have a legacy security entity that has a phases and gates process and a waterfall to be able to integrate, and all of a sudden you're so far behind. And we knew, because we listened to the market, we talked to other experts, we knew we did not want to be in a place where we were slowing down the go-to-market that would generate the revenue that was on the plan. So we said, let's take a different step. We'll take a chapter out of a couple other people's books. We went to Salesforce. We sat down with the teams at Google. We spoke to the folks at Amex that were on the kind of the same. So we spoke to other professionals, and we thought that this model worked well for us. And so we started down this journey. But, it took some getting used to. And quite frankly, we actually had to hire different types of people in place. A lot of our engineers today that are working on cloud or working on open source defense, or they managed firewalls at one point, or they wrote, dev code for something else. But we train them into these positions because we always kind of keep a 3-year, what are we going to need next based on the commitments of the business. But what we found in this space is we didn't have the right skill set at an architect level. So almost all of our architects are net new to the business in the last 2 years. That was a big change for us because we're a big believer in taking your skilled workforce, educating them on the needs of the business, and empowering them to change their careers to get there. Most people have like a 21% turnover rate. I'll brag a little bit. We're, always somewhere between 6 and 8. The highest we've hit in the last 5 years is 12%. we monitor these things because it's super important. It's really expensive to go find new talent. It takes a long time to get people up to date. So if you can engage your talent pool, if you can make them successful, if you can give them different jobs in a career inside a single organization, we feel, it's better for the company, it's better for them, and it's a win-win. So that's kind of what we've done.
That makes perfect sense, both for the business as you sort of grow those individuals, you're less behind, you ensure that they have the right skills that you actually want them to have. And then it's great for the individuals. They get to grow. They want to stick around, clearly, because they can trust that, ADP sort of have their back and actually, kind of help them adapt as the business change. So that's like really insightful. It's like one of the key changes is this by design element. And then, you kind of veered into the sort of the skills change that are needed. There's an aspect of it, which is you're sort of trying to carry along, the people and evolve their skills to this model. You've mentioned one specific skill, which is one of architecture that you felt you kind of needed to bring in. What other primary skills did you need to kind of level up, or rather skills that you felt like were no longer as necessary amidst the team, regardless of whether you hired them from outside or if you had to build them in or to like grow people into them?
So I'll hit two right off the bat. I mean, I'm assuming just everyone else, all of your listeners probably have the same challenges as well. But developers, I mean, we're a protective defensive shop. We had engineers, right? We had people that understand everything from, NT4.0 up to, Linux kernels and everything in between on how to defend it. But a lot of what we do now is develop into the product sets or develop into the business process to be able to exchange the information necessary. For example, we collect 25 billion events a day on our platform, right? So think about our security intelligence platforms. It's a big elk stack. We're on one platform globally. That means we collect for all of our product sets around the world and aggregate into regions and bring that back into a massive security intelligence data warehouse. How do you develop against that? That's not like content development, right? That's data science. We've had to bring in folks that understand how to develop our platform to be able to code, to exchange the information. We had to bring in data scientists that built out our data science piece. So we're not doing, simple correlation. We're doing advanced analytics. We're doing some ML. AI didn't really work well for us in this sense. We've actually outsourced most of our AI stuff to some providers, but that core skill had to be developed. And then the output of that, you need an analyst. I mean, so we've actually had to hire some folks with that skill set. We've got some amazing practitioners we've brought in that had nothing to do with security prior, but are incredible data analysts. And then you give them that strong security, those security underpinnings. You give them context to understand the what and why of cyber, and they become just enthralled like I did with stopping bad people and understanding what's happening, and they've got that core skill set. We're just doing some amazing things. So, I mean, I can talk about all the skills, but if I had to name the top ones, really it's app dev, data science, and analysts.
Yeah, well, both like pretty much the sort of skill set that the kind of the world as a whole, not that surprising, that the world as a whole is kind of in kind of growing demand of, but also maybe there's like a little bit of a positive spin to the fact that with security talent being in such shortage, once again, if you're able to like build security knowledge into people that come with that type of other background, then you're able to scale your team, that much better.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's indeed kind of, double click there. Well, that's an old analogy, go deeper into this world of app dev and the application themselves. We talked about the organization, but in practice, when you think about, one of the more modern application teams out there that is deploying, maybe cloud operated software within ADP, how does the security team engage over there in kind of a regular course of operation? Which teams are involved? How is their daily interaction? You mentioned one bit, which is that embedded architect, but you also mentioned app dev teams and the likes. How does that work?
So yeah, let's segment into kind of two areas right now. So our next 4 advanced technology in our go-to-market, all 4 are built on native cloud, and so we've kind of parsed out 2 really specific areas. Think of it as INO, or infrastructure and operations in cloud, and app dev. So folks building the products set on top of that infrastructure. From a infrastructure standpoint, what we've done is we've created a model or what we call smart cloud. I know, really fancy names, but smart cloud, and we're at 2.0 right now that they're building out, which is essentially an on-ramp and standardization capability for the clouds that we sit in. And it's minimum level of controls, minimum level of technology management. For instance, in our DevSecOps model, we don't allow people to manage their firewalls. That is done by a centralized security I&O function and with our partners in global technology. They don't make their own AMIs. There's a platform assurance group that creates the AMIs they need to be able to run. They don't manage the security output of their container. They just need the container, right? They don't need to manage the container management piece of it. We provide that service for them. So we've broken out basic I&O functions as a service, almost like if you were to go to AWS and say, click, I need this OS, I need this service, and I need these three functions, right? We give that to them in a managed fashion. And so behind the scenes, we have what would have been, I think people would call, quote unquote, again, legacy enterprise security people that are now providing these as cloud services using different tool sets, but eventually using many like processes internally to manage both the defend, the detect, and the protect, or in the respond side of the house. On the apps dev piece, we've introduced a whole new set of technologies. So we have standardized code repositories, Rally infrastructure, bug management, and threat management. So what's interesting is once you start planning for your code, we have a threat modeling as a service. So it automatically goes in, they lay out their plan, and we do the threat modeling based on the type of product, the type of information and data they intend to touch, if they're going to move money, all of that sort of stuff, comes out with the requirements, gets automatically put into the Rally, and then that is discussed amongst the dev team with the senior architect. But the SecOps portion of that, or the DevSec portion of that, is done by the dev teams. We're building that skill set into developers. We're not having security people doing it for them. So this is truly security by design. And we're upskilling, our developers to give them that capability to do it through tools and mentorship. If you give them the tools and they get the output and there's someone explaining it to them, they're going to do it the second time. And so that works super well. It lets us stay out of the way. So we're not having to do check and validation independently. When they post their code back in at the end of the day, we've made an investment in automated, code scanning. So we're not waiting till compiled code or pre-compiled code to get there. We're doing at time of coding. So by the time they come back in the morning, they get their bug list and they're back at it. And this way we can actually tell by teams and we can actually tell by product who's getting it and who isn't getting it. So we can refocus the architects in those sections to say, hey, Jimmy or Sally's, not really getting it. Can you spend more time with them? They had 30% of the bugs, in that code or, for their group. So it's really through tooling, education, and, trial by fire a little bit.
Both sounds like really kind of great programs. And, the app dev, it sounds like on the app dev side, there's a service element, but a lot of it is that embedding with that security architect and the by design drive. While on the I&O side, it's a little bit more the guardrails, like a little bit more driven by, we're going to do this for you. And I guess there's how much has this acted as constraints? I mean, how much has the fact that you can't pick, any old container, but rather, just the ones that have been approved or any old AMI, how much is that?
Initially, it was painful because people just wanted to run with scissors down the hall and didn't know that, if I fell, I was going to have a bad day. But a couple people fell and got stitches, right? So, product issues, security issues, slowed them down. They started to see that. Guy, where we're still having issues, I'd be interested in your opinion on this, is all of the cool tools that are coming out. Here's the code we haven't cracked. If a developer is just loves, and we'll just use AWS, it's easiest and it's our biggest footprint. If a developer goes in and sees a new function, a new service, a new capability at AWS, they're releasing every week now. They were releasing every month. Now they're releasing every week. And it's not pre-certified. It hasn't been validated. at the end of the day, it's essentially we whitelist the tools they can use. So it's not available. That's still causing a problem. And so we feel like we're constraining them because we can't do this fast enough. And we're not sure how to, because, how does that tool enable access to data elements on the back end? How does that bypass existing controls? Can we take data elements out of that to bring back in for monitoring and management? Like, we have to do that work. And that's not like 10 minutes. And there's a stack of requests. So I'm interested, what your thoughts are around that, because this has been tough.
Indeed, yeah. Well, no, I've got plenty, but I think the two primary examples of how to tackle this, or points that I would raise, are, one is what's called the paved path, or sort of the paved road approach. So it's basically splitting up the things that are in the paved path. This is the easiest. Just choose one of these and you're going, and it's going to be the easiest, most frictionless kind of experience. On the other side, you've got the hard gates, like some of these constraints are just non-negotiable, and, it's sad that they slow something down, but it's reality. You just have to stay within these boundaries. But there are gaps. There's off-road kind of between those kind of fences and the paved path. And if you go off-road, then you need to do more work. So you basically roll some constraints or some diligence that you require those development teams to do if they want to choose those. And they're not.
So you make them do the work on your behalf, if you will, and provide the results back prior to going forward?
Precisely. And that serves a dual purpose. One is, of course, like you allow them autonomy, but you say, well, if you want this kind of power, you get this responsibility as well. So you have to maybe, fill in some models and some questionnaires and be able to answer these. And so some of that work is done. And by the time, if 3 teams have done that, and by the time it gets to you, the central security team, it might be in slightly better shape, right? Might save you some cycles to those developers that probably still, like, as big as your security organization is, I suspect it's still outnumbered by, the number of developers by a good ratio. And then the other thing that it does is that it actually raises awareness within these development teams, because it makes them appreciate, the questions in place, right? And you would need to invest in making this process educational and not just bureaucratic to say you have to do those processes. So I think that's probably the best path. Quite a few guests on the show have kind of named that sort of paved path approach as one they like, and I think it's a good one. The other point I would say, and I would actually be curious to see if you've encountered this as a shift, is you mentioned AMIs and containers. I would posit that there's a trend that is basically, in the world of cloud, moving IT into app, and moving from sort of IT people or I&O people into dev. So a good example of that might be the VMs or the AMI versus the container. The AMI, technically the same, it's a base image on which you build and sort of deploy your software, similar conceptually and sort of, some technical differences, of course, the engine that runs them. But operationally, your Docker file sits in a repository. Patching it requires, a rebuild that typically includes more than just building the image. It also includes picking up pieces from the app itself, and is much more of a dev practice. And we sort of see some of that trend going with network, with, like the VPC configuration versus a service mesh. You might see it in, a MongoDB that's built into your application versus, an Oracle DB that you sort of manage off to the side. How much have you observed, is that trend of maybe I&O to app dev or relationship?
Absolutely. Way down the road. Yeah, our partners over in Global Products and Technology actually, at the same time that we were embracing DevSecOps, said, we need to get to DevOps, but more importantly, we need to get to standardization around some of the technologies they were using. I mean, understand it's a 4,000 person, development and technology organization, right? It's 12 different divisions, and I don't even know how many hundreds of products at this point. So it's a big world, but that's absolutely where they're going. But making sure that there's accountable people, humans, that have that specific job to make sure that the right AMIs are available. That they're constantly kept up to date. They're part of the dev teams now, or they're moving to be part of the dev teams. What we've made a conscious effort at is not losing the rigor around functional accountability, because where we have seen other companies fail miserably is when they say, yeah, we're going to move those over to the dev teams, and all of a sudden, no one wants to do that work.
No one wants to.
They don't get it done. There's no operational maintenance. There's no guardrails. So I think our partners over on GPT, or Global Products and Technology, started with that in mind, with we're not going to fail, and so we're going to do this at a reasonable rate. But that's absolutely the practice that they're migrating to. SDN integrated at the product level with guardrails that folks in DevOps group per product are required to manage. Quote unquote, IT is not going to come up and start spinning up and spinning down instances to make sure that you refresh the latest AMI. They're going to provide you with certain things. It's the devs group responsibility to go get that done.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And of course, this is going to evolve. Not all parts of the organization are going to move in kind of the same unit. So let's indeed talk a little bit about the change. This is an organizational evolution. We talked about how the security org had to adapt. What changes did you need to instill amidst the dev team side? What practices did you have to instill? What was easy? What was hard?
Let's start on the security organization side. I think that's where some of the bigger changes had to happen in the mind shift. First and foremost, we had to get into a cycle of where we changed how we were doing our own development work. We were actually managing our services and developing our services and delivering them. And we had to really change and embrace new styles of work. So I think that was number one. We had to bring people together and teach them new ways to work. The second is we had to move from straight service delivery to threat-led defense. So mission segments, right? So we started getting, way too siloed, if you will. We're technical security services. We do these 5 functions. We're threat and incident management. We do these 6. That's not who we are, but that's some organizations that just sometimes that's what happens. So what we said is, we have cyber, we have data defense, we have public safety, we have financial crimes. Those are mission segments. And I need an architect. I need an engineer. It should start with risk. I need all of these things to be part of that mission segment. So we created executive owners of the missions and senior directors responsible for the mission segments, and then populated each one of those. So it drove transparency and understanding of what we were trying to accomplish in each one of those areas. So that was a big change, and it got people focused on how to work faster in a specific mission segment without throwing stuff over the fence on a constant basis.
Yeah. How long did it take to overhaul? I'm sure there was a lot of planning, kind of once enacted, once designed. Was this kind of hard switch?
Oh, no, we're still doing it. We're 18 months into it, and we're still doing it, Guy. I mean, it's probably a 2-year evolution to get it, to like a CMM level 4 type, thing.
Yep.
But it's a couple year conversion because you're moving people from a service-based delivery model to a missions-based defense model, and it's just different. But it works. The next step was, listen, we're not going to go into the dev world and tell them what to do or just automatically attach them. We had the architects in there. We started our by design process. But what we really, really felt, and I think what made us successful, especially in the 3 first iterations of this, was give them the tools. We didn't say, we're going to introduce you to our technology. Our security, from the time that we do threat analysis of their design to the time that we're supporting them on bug code management, right through each aspect of the rally, it's their tools. We coded into their tools. And then what we did is we took the, other, like our code monitoring, our security testing analysis tools, all of those things, and we automated it into their platform, what they develop on, and we gave them here, use this tool set type of service. They want to test it themselves, go ahead. So we expanded our licensing to allow them to essentially check in and check out tools to use against their code. And, embedding that into how they work was a big component of it. So change how we work operationally and give the tools away into their tooling was, I think, brilliant on the team's part to get us where we are today.
Yeah, it sounds super critical. Has that impacted your choice of tools? Was there sort of a set of tools that you had to kind of reconfigure because they fit the bill from a functional perspective when they were operated by a security expert, but they didn't they weren't kind of fit for purpose when you thought about dev teams running them?
We had tools that weren't working, that we had to get rid of, different suites of tools because they wouldn't integrate natively via API into the coding infrastructure. And since then, though, we've worked with companies. I don't want to mention specific companies, but we've worked with them because their tools are so good to get them to do that. And we brought them back in. Again, it's by design, and we have some basic principles. It has to be automated. It has to be integrated into the developer's tool set, not us forcing tools down their throat that they're never going to use. There has to be a self-service capability, and those tools have to integrate back, meaning they have to be capable of exfiltrating their information. So, for instance, if a post-compile assessment done is with a certain tool set, that information will actually not just go into their bug tracking, but will be exported to our GRC platform for that product, which will automatically update their product score. I mean, it's like that automatic. What we didn't want to do is add on more exfil data, put it into a data hub, parse it back out, make it someone's job to do that. We want, the basic reliance here is on automation.
Yeah, you need to scale the operation of the tool, but you also need to scale the governance of these activities kind of in the same time. Did you find the incentive model for development had to be touched? I mean, there's been a lot of conversation on this show on sort of celebrating security successes, anywhere from, sort of stickers to hoodies to sort of all sorts of like holiday retreats, when
Well, we haven't gotten that far yet with the retreats.
How do you do that? Like, how do you sort of celebrate security successes amidst people that are not in the security org?
Yeah, so we have a SAFE program. We have two programs. One, we have a CSO award. The CSO award can only be awarded to someone outside of the security organization. And what's great is that it can be initiated by anyone, but we prefer it be initiated by a security practitioner recognizing somebody within development or inside the business. I mentioned the SAFE program. This is where people sign up because they want to learn more about security. We follow kind of like, who made this pop? Probably Salesforce model, where you have different belts, right? You have white belt, yellow belt, green belt, blue belt, black belt. In there, you get there's different awards based on your skill set, how you're participating, things you find, and how you score out in some of the things. I don't want to call them games, but it's gamification of education, if you will. And a black belt, I sit down with our black belts and we have conversation about security. They get access to some of our intelligence programs that we just don't allow everyone in the company to have access to. So they get special access. They get, kind of a special focus. They get special awards as they're part of this. Now I'm going to bring up the negative side of it, though, because I think it's important. Now, we always focus on good behavior, but there are some people, good, bad, or indifferent, that I've just found out through my career that they just don't give a crap, right? Like they don't want to do it. That's not the way they've done it. They're not going to do it. And they do things counter to the strategic direction of the development organization, of the company. And those people that don't get it, that aren't going to put the client first in the security insurance of their information or their data through good quality coding. This isn't secure coding. This is just good quality code, right? And if they're not going to take that seriously, then they don't need to be with the business. And I think our CIO, our SVP of products, and our president of global products and technology take that really seriously. And they look at the conduct part of it, and they do all the right things of education and providing, internal training and things like that. But those people that don't reach that level, you're not going to be a C+ player on the ADP team coding the future of our business, right? And so they make that known as well, I think, which incentivizes other people to be the best they can be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it has to also sort of celebrate those who do it well, but you also have to sort of keep your organization at a certain caliber. We're already going to go long, but I have two questions I still kind of need to get in here. So one is, how do you measure all this stuff? Like you have a lot of moving parts, you want to do a lot of things right. How do you measure security as a whole? And maybe if there's a specific angle about this transition, this change, and in the new model, how do you know if it works or not?
So every program, project, mission area, service has a KRI and KPI, right? I wish I could actually throw it on the screen. We have an amazing platform that we call Althena, where we collect information out of our tool sets, out of our GRC, out of our data hub, and we do automated analysis. It is the same platform that I use to deliver metrics and measures to the board of directors, the audit committee, the executive committee, the executive security council, and oversight organizations. Same exact information. So we look at our service areas through these KRIs and these KPIs. I think the important part is we make that information available to different parts of the business. So if you're a GM of a certain product set, you get information, you get access to that information about the platform you're sitting in, about the technology you're on, so on and so forth. The development teams get access to their scorecards. We have security scorecards for each product. It rates infrastructure, code, a bunch of things that we measure, like the effectiveness of the controls based on our red teaming and our global vulnerability assessment group. So all of those things get to measure. They can see themselves against their peers. And because it's a single platform, they can actually go deep and get to the actual incidents and issues to be able to remediate those. So the D and ADP, super important. We are a data intelligence driven organization, and we provide that back. So we look at the efficacy of the tool or control we're using based on those scores. What's cool though, and you didn't ask, is what we're doing in the coming year, because we actually brought in a firm to be able to go deep into the cost analysis in two areas. One is, what does this stuff really cost us off the GL, right? Like, what does that defensive architecture cost? How much are we putting into it, and how effective is it? And then we're a fair shop from a risk perspective. And so everything goes into our GRC. Today we use fair maybe on 20% of our risk analysis because it's a pretty heavy process. But we're working with a couple companies to actually do automated fair assessments bidirectionally out of our GRC out to their ML process and come back in. So we'll have definitive fair risk alignment to the cost back to the efficacy of the control that we already have. So it's a pretty cool model that we're building to. But again, it all starts with understanding what controls, what their efficacies are, and how do you get that information to other people.
The model sounds great, and also kind of aggregates at scale. I want to drill into the word efficacy. Oftentimes in security, measuring efficacy is a little tricky. Most typically I've seen two paths. One that is more metric driven about activity, if you will. Have I found vulnerabilities? Have I locked attacks? A little bit more attributed to the functionality of this tool. Does it does what it is supposed to be doing from a technical perspective? And the other is more maybe risk assessment. Of more trying to gauge. Have I seen attacks go deeper? Have I more about those types of results? Have red teams kind of broken? Do they resonate? How do you assess efficacy for something as kind of elusive as risk?
Yeah, so it's more of a mix. I would say it's more in the former than the latter, because we actually have, is a tool needed? Do we still have the technology? Are we seeing attacks specific to what that control function is like? But we say, have we tested it? So we have a red team, we have a global vulnerability team, we have an intel team that provides the input specific to the control. By the way, we have a controls assurance group. We have that on purpose because, first, I do not look good in orange or stripes. So their job is to keep me out of jail and know that the controls that we have committed to work. And that's it. That's really their focus. They look at the control and do that. I don't think it'd be fair to say we have a perfect automated risk formula for the controls. We have a risk formula, via a factor analysis for information risk we use generally across all of our controls and risks. I don't think it has an efficacy mark. But this is, I guess, to my earlier point, this is where we want to go. We want to know the cost, we want to know the risk, and we want to know the effectiveness and efficacy of that control to be able to create a better model. And so, yeah, that's the stated direction, the invested direction, and where we're heading.
Well, sounds farther ahead than kind of most organizations that are in this state. So with that in mind, I'll ask you one last question. It'll be a slight deviation from how I usually ask the kind of end of questions, just because of having, it seems like you're still in the middle, but having done this transition from the more sort of legacy or sort of previous view on how to do security to a more modern view. if you have, kind of one key tip to give to, a fellow CISO who is, has been in your shoes 4 years ago and is looking to try and kind of shift to more where you are today, what's like a primary piece of guidance that you would tell them?
Yeah, it's simple. Get help. I mean, if you're not coming from a development world and you've been protecting things your entire life and you've grown up in a very different model, don't think you're going to read a couple of blogs and, watch a video and a couple TED Talks and all of a sudden, know how to do it, osmosis through a book. Find people who have done it. Find an outside organization or a consultant or someone and, validate they've done it, but bring them in for their expertise. I think that's the number one thing that I can say. Find people that can make it happen for you.
That's excellent advice, very concise. So if people want to join kind of this sort of, security experience at ADP, where can they sort of find job listings and the likes?
Yeah, ADP.com. Just hit the jobs button, search global security, and we're always looking for incredible men and women that are mission-centric, want to be in the fight every day, and that just love doing what we do. So always something out there. So please go look.
Excellent. Well, Roland, this has been a pleasure. We're already kind of one of the longer episodes, but I probably could have gone on with a whole bunch more questions. Thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Okay, I appreciate it and hope to do it again with you.
And thanks everybody for tuning back in, and I hope you join us for the next one.
Thanks for listening to The Secure Developer. That's all we have time for today. For additional episodes and full transcriptions, visit mydevsecops.io. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or get involved in the community, you can also find us on Twitter at @mydevsecops. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes if you enjoyed today's episode. Bye for now.